Welcome to 4,000 Weeks, the weekly audio dispatch from 4kweeks.com. It is August 24th. It is week 35 of the year 2025. And the first thing that I owe you this week is the dad joke of the week, and what a fitting joke it is for the beginning of corn harvesting season in Kansas. Actually, we've got another couple of weeks before farmers start harvesting corn. Anyway, why shouldn't you tell secrets in a cornfield? Why shouldn't you tell secrets in a cornfield? We will get to the punchline at the end of the podcast. It is week 35 of 2025, and I'm sure this makes me sound like an old man, but the zinnias are absolutely crushing it this time of year. I planted a whole bunch of zinnia seed in the spring, and they are just bringing me and my wife so much joy this time of year. They've been blooming for a while now, but every time I look, I'm like, man, you guys are still blooming. They are so persistent, and more of them keep blooming. It's spectacular. I'm actually gonna, after the first frost, I'm gonna go collect all the seed, store it in a paper bag, and see about sowing it in the late winter, so we can enjoy these flowers again. It's time for you to walk over to your 4K Weeks poster and fill in another square. Are you done? Okay. I know that one of the reasons that I so enjoy the changing of the seasons and the coming and going of the flowers, etc., is because I am now old enough to have lived through them and seen things grow and change repeatedly. And it's such a blessing to have finally lived long enough to see the cycle of it all enough times to recognize it as a familiar friend. I think that's just one of those things you cannot understand until you are in your maybe late 30s, before you've gotten through the crush of adolescence and young adulthood and having a family started, and then you start seeing things going and things coming back. And it's just delightful. Week 35 of 1961. Bob Dylan got booed for playing an electric guitar at the concert in Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in New York City. I was in a band when I was younger, and one of our guitarists started on the acoustic and then switched to the electric, and a small paper wrote an article about us right about that time and used that as an example, Bob Dylan switching from acoustic to electric guitar, and how our fans were not outraged like Bob Dylan's were. And I thought that was so weird because, we were just a scrubby college town band. But anyway, that's the thing that happened. He was 1,057 weeks old, or 20.27 years. Gosh, that's super young. The quote of the week. The quote of the week is from Václav Havel. Either way. Work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Isn't this it? I mean, human beings, we're all exactly the same, while also being unique little snowflakes. We're all walking around terrified to start something because, well, what if it doesn't succeed? Seth Godin, if you know who he is, and if you don't, you should, talks about this a lot. Incidentally, Seth Godin has been around the internet so long that if you just Google Seth, his blog is the first one that comes up. So there's the reference there. This is something that we all do. It's so painful to imagine something you're dreaming about accomplishing falling short. Like, that is so painful that most of the time it's better to just continue to dream a dream so that it can't either succeed or fail, because it's just in your head. It's not in the world where things have to actually do something. That's a safer choice than trying to do the work and risking failure. And in fact, I would argue that nobody does anything until the pain of not doing it exceeds the pain of doing it. Right? It has to hurt bad enough. You have to get bored enough. You have to be so sick and tired of not accomplishing your dream that you finally can stomach the pain of trying. But as far as we all know, you and I have only been given these bodies for somewhere between 0 and 114 years, maybe 118 years if you're lucky. And there is no guarantee that you will ever be given a body ever again that you can use to try. I mean, who knows? I don't know if you've seen the movie, or not the movie, the TV show, The Good Place. I talk about it a decent amount. There's a place where they get to where they're just kind of all farting around, having no struggles. And then this book that I'm reading that I'll reference later, I think it's called The Magicians. These magical kids are struggling with the existential crisis of not having any struggle. And so you've been given this body. Go use it. It would be better to use it with failure after failure after failure than to not use it at all because you were afraid of failure, because it's finite. It's going to end. And you don't know if you will ever be given the opportunity as a manifest physical being to strive. Because spiritual beings don't strive. Your spirit, when it ascends to whatever heights you believe a spirit ascends to, or if it just turns into dust and becomes particles on this earth, if that's what you believe, there's no other trying. They don't try. Those things aren't strivers. And so make hay while the sun shines. I've been thinking about this. I thought this morning about social media. I try to minimize looking at social media. It's kind of crazy because parts of my life are so entwined with social media that it has to be available to me for me to keep doing the things that I have decided are important. And it's also, it's like having brownies in the house, right? It's like having a platter of brownies on the counter. I know that brownies are not part of my fitness goals, but they are delicious and, moderation in all things. But often I find myself not having one little bit of brownie, but having maybe 2 or 3 or 4 bits of brownie. You just start kind of squaring off the edges of the brownie pan, and now you've had way more brownie than you thought. Whereas if you just didn't have brownies on the counter, you wouldn't be eating brownies. Metaphor over. And so I was thinking about this morning with social media. My life is too important. I have too many things. My creativity, which is a tiny little flame inside of you and inside of me that needs to be nurtured, lest it almost disappear, is too important to be spending time as a energy source for the algorithm that is trying to sell me ads. So stop being so damn afraid of not succeeding and just try something because it is good, because trying is good and doing is good. And this is maybe the last opportunity you'll get to do it. Work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Because in fact, everything you do is going to fail because one day you're going to die and not be able to keep doing it. So you're already a failure with regard to perpetual motion. So just go and do. What I have consumed this week, a lot of things this week, a lot of diverse things. I think it's interesting. I used to put a lot more stuff in the what I consumed category. And then, just because of the nature of the world these days, a lot of the stuff I'm consuming is not stuff I want to encourage you to consume, frankly. The first thing, it's been in here for 3 weeks, Stand Out of Our Light by James William. It is a book that is a result of the 9 Dots Prize, which is an amazing endeavor by these people who strip all of the identifying information away from submissions, and they read essays about novel ways to address concerns in the world, and then they pay these people to write books. And so because of that, you can read the books for free. This book is about attention, and I think attention is the most important natural resource in the world right now. It's important to protect your attention, and it's also important to think about how we value how other people are using theirs, because where you put your attention is where you put the line of what's possible. And, the people who are ruining the world are masters at directing your attention. And that just kind of shows you how important it is. People are willing to pay billions of dollars for your attention. Okay, next thing. This article in The Atlantic, it's linked in the email. I'm not going to mention the title. You can click to the email if you want to read it. I shared it as a gift in the email so that you can, even if you don't have a subscription to The Atlantic, you should be able to read it. It's a great read. Here's this one quote This is one quote from the article that I think, you got to get through the opening chapter where he sets the premise of why he's talking about this. But then when you get into it, here's a quote. One of the problems with living in a society with no shared moral order is that we have no way to settle arguments. We have no objective standard by which to determine that one view is right and another view is wrong. So public arguments just go on indefinitely at greater levels of indignation and polarization. People use self-righteous words to get their way, but instead of engaging in moral argument, what they're really doing is using the language of morality to enforce their own preferences. It's a really good conversation about moral frameworks and how they affect what's possible for our culture. Next thing, Diary of a CEO podcast. I've been listening to a lot of these lately, even though I have said previously, it's not my favorite. Stephen Bartlett is not my favorite podcast host. And the reason is, I'll say, is because I don't think he often challenges assumptions. He doesn't challenge the worldview of the person he's interviewing enough for my taste. I will say, however, lately he has been saying why. Someone will say a thing and he'll say why, or he'll say, what is that? And I heard him explain that the reason he does that is because he heard from a young man who was incarcerated in Great Britain who was listening to his podcast, who doesn't have access to the resources you and I do. So he can't just go Google something. So he tries to get to the root of what something is, which I think is honorable, and it's getting better, but he has really good guests lately. Last week, I recommended the Diary of a CEO podcast with Mo Gadot, former Google executive, talking about AI. And that is a podcast I have been referencing regularly in the last few weeks because it is so good, and we are in for a whirlwind in the future. However, this one is an 18-minute clip from his podcast with Alain de Botton, and he is a spectacularly wonderful philosopher. His TED Talk about the Sundays and what it means to how we value people in our modern culture is spectacular. But this podcast, it's a synopsis of how he thinks about achievement and meritocracy in the modern world, and maybe what some of the downsides of meritocracy might be. It's a very good listen, and it's also short, 18 minutes. And then that book I mentioned earlier that I've been reading, I needed a book, and as often happens, I asked my wife, and she recommended this one. And I was about halfway through it. I think I said, like, on page 1, I was like, I feel like I've read this before. But then I read halfway through it before I realized, yes, I have read this before. It was a specific scene, a specific thing happened that was weird and beautiful in description, and I was like, yes, I totally read this before. But I had forgotten enough of it that it was delightful to read it again. I love a good adventure book about people coming of age and magic. I loved Harry Potter, and this is similar but better in a lot of ways. It's not written, I don't feel like it's written for kids. Maybe it's young adult, but it's very adult in its discussion about meaning and the listlessness of meaning that comes when everything is available to you, which I think is like a great metaphor for our modern culture. That in the Diary of a CEO podcast with Mo Gadot, he calls this the age of more, because more we can have as much as we want. You can order 1 million things off of Amazon for almost no money tomorrow, and yet that doesn't fill the empty hole in your soul. And the discussion in this book is a lot about the existential crisis that comes when all of your dreams have come true and you don't continue to have to strive for something. There's a good portion in the middle of this book about that. That also is kind of part of the thing that has made me think about this social media disaster, even the small amount of it that I fall prey to. And I'm not sure how to solve that problem, and I've been working on it. But that existential crisis that the main character is feeling in this book kind of helped me put a pin in my the thing I was thinking about. Anyway, moving on to what I am thinking about this week. Oh my goodness, transitions. I'm not going to talk about my arm this week. Healing up nicely. Other than that, healing is weird. If you pay attention, there's a lot of different sensations. But this week, transitions. I don't know about you and your house, but if you have children, you probably feel this. It has been a fairly big week at our house, an exhausting, emotionally, physically exhausting week, as our kids, our 2 children, have gone back to school, actual school, for the first time in years. And I mean, just sidebar, man, school starts early. And man, really 9 more months of this? As former homeschoolers, we were very spoiled, and we knew we were spoiled, but knowing you're spoiled and then experiencing in real time how you are no longer spoiled are 2 totally different things. This has been so clearly a beginning that is also hiding an ending. And beginnings and endings are painful either way. Growth is painful. It's all painful. But beginnings benefit from being the pain of growth, which is always much more tolerable. So this is interesting. I will talk about my arm for a second. This is not in the email, but the pain of breaking your arm is pain, but it is also the psychological pain of damage and of retreat and of falling down into a hole. The pain of rehabilitating your arm, regaining the movements and range of motion and strength that you had, is also painful, but it is the pain of progress and growth, and so it's much easier to tolerate. Beginnings benefit from being the pain of growth, which is just so much more tolerable. And as we grow through this transition, I'm noticing that I have a lot of difficulty with my lack of control here. When you homeschool your kids, you are their world. Their world is much smaller in a good way. As long as you're good, as long as it's a good environment, right? As long as you have a worldview that you want them to share in certain ways that you believe strongly in and you're willing to embody from a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis. I've learned that kids they don't respond very well to being told things, but they seem to respond wonderfully to being shown things day in, day out. And I've been trying to remind myself that I actually have control over nothing. Things happen as they will. And it's good to remind myself that, but I have noticed wanting to be more in control and having trouble with that, with the reality that I cannot control the experience that they're going to have, the people that they're going to meet, the kids that they're going to become friends with. I can manage it, right? And I can be their parent, and I will continue to be their parent, but I do not have control over the direction that they're heading for the most part, other than all of the work I've done already. And stacked on top of the kids' transition is a transition in my wife and I's life as well. Well, both our shared life and our individual lives, because even though we are a very close couple, we do still have individual lives, which is a weird thing to have an individual life with your best friend and partner, from your best friend and partner. But we are working on one of the hardest areas of life questions to answer, which is, what should we do? What should we fill our days with? What should be the North Star that we are grinding towards, both together as a unit, as a family unit, as two pack animals hitched to the same cart, but also as individuals who are navigating this weird thing that is life. I've spent the last 2 years working on 4K weeks and a few other small projects, but with 4K weeks as the main focus and attention. And now in the last 6 months, I have really refocused my attention on the sculpture studio, which has been delightful. If you love something, set it free, and if it returns to you, then it truly is yours. And I loved sculpture, and I loved being a sculptor, but I, for many different reasons, set it free. And it came back, and I'm really, really excited about it now. But what does that mean, and what are we going to do? It's so easy to fill a month, a year, a life with days full of doing things that don't actually move the needle. And I say that without judgment about how you should move the needle. What is important and valuable to you has to be different to what is important and valuable to me in many different ways. And so, but still, accomplishment is important. And it doesn't really matter what your North Star is, as long as you have one and you're heading towards it. And I think it's also, clearly, as evidenced by me, totally fine to intentionally shift which North Star you're heading towards, right? That's exactly what I did. I just decided I didn't want to be a sculptor anymore for a while. And that was very puzzling to my wife, who kind of witnessed me for my entire young adulthood strive desperately to make this thing work, only for when it was finally working really well to be like, no, that's not really exciting to me anymore. It's just totally fine to intentionally shift with which North Star you're heading towards. What isn't fine is wandering around in the dark and wondering why you aren't getting anywhere, all the while acting like the lights are turned on and you have a direction. And I mean, this can be very productive feeling, right? Like you can be chasing a whole bunch of metrics that don't actually have an overarching mission or life goal. I'm not talking about people who aren't successful in life. I'm talking about people who would, from the outside, seem successful, but only because they've checked all the boxes, they have all the things, they can order stuff on Amazon whenever they want. But they're still just going around in circles working on useless things. And you can do that, I think, until you are in your mid-40s, before it starts to be like, wait, what the hell am I doing? And maybe that's what a midlife crisis is. I don't know. It is painful to realize that there is no direction you're heading. It's not fine to wander around in the dark and wonder why you aren't getting anywhere. And in fact, in that Atlantic article, a big discussion is that we used to have, through the Romans, right, or the in the Renaissance, the Middle Ages, different times we have had different cultural North Stars that everyone is heading towards. And we can argue about whether or not those were good for the world itself, I guess, but they were certainly good for the feeling of fulfillment and accomplishment of the people who existed in that time. There was no existential crisis about that. They were doing this thing. This is how you do these things, right? And we look back now and we think it's weird because we're so individual. But what that means is that you now have to decide for you what your path is going to be. You should read the article. It's very interesting. And sometimes when you're thinking about a thought, sidebar, when you're thinking about a thought, hearing other people's perspectives, hearing a different metaphor, hearing another story about someone wandering around in the woods helps you put a finger on the feelings you're feeling and the feelings you want to be feeling. So that's what I mean there. But all this is to say, pick a direction, pick a mission, pick a North Star, and head towards it confidently. And this is not... It cannot be a hedonistic thing. It can't be buy a BMW. It can't be buy a Lamborghini. That is not a North Star. That is just one more checkbox in the to-do list of keeping up with the Joneses. All of those things. And everything is keeping up with the Joneses unless it's not. That's a dumb sentence, but it's true. I was talking to my buddy about a decision a purchase I was thinking of making that was not totally unnecessary. And he said, well, a good rule is like, if you could make this choice, this purchase, and no one would know that you did it, but you would have done it and get to enjoy whatever it is, would you still do it? That's a good way to make sure you're not keeping up with the Joneses. But pick a direction, pick a mission, pick a North Star, and head towards it confidently. And then keep your head up and keep looking around every now and then to make sure that you're still headed in the right direction or that you still want to be headed in this direction, right? I think it's fair to intentionally make a choice to change directions. And then when you know what your mission is, today's to-do list mostly writes itself, number one, and number two also doesn't feel like work. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger says, when Tim Ferriss asked him, how did you have that confidence from an early age that you wanted to do this? He's like, well, I'm not going to do my Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. Well, maybe for a minute. No, maybe not. But he's like, it became more like, I can't wait to do the 200 sit-ups I need to do to get the abs that I need to win the contest that I want to win. It wasn't, oh gosh, I don't want to do these 200 sit-ups. That reframing, and again, we can argue whether or not winning a contest like Mr. Olympia is worth it to you, but it certainly was worth it to Arnold, and it was a journey that required struggle and sacrifice, and that is a valuable skill. And I don't think you can argue a whole bunch of things about Arnold Schwarzenegger. You cannot argue whether or not he has been successful at pointing himself in a direction and confidently heading there. When you know what your mission is, today's to-do list will mostly write itself and then be a joy to accomplish. And I can't tell you how good that feels. It's like rolling down the hill as opposed to slogging up the hill. That is it for this week. Oh gosh. There's a couple of links in the email, the read time link and the reward link about some sleight of hand magic that are just so worth watching. You should go see those. The dad joke of the week. Why shouldn't you tell secrets in a cornfield? You know the answer to this. You know the punchline. There's too many ears. Too many ears. Okay, have a spectacular week. If you did enjoy the podcast today and you haven't subscribed or liked it or rated it and reviewed it, that would be spectacular. Just that little bit of feedback often makes it worth me doing this for the next week. And you would be surprised how little engagement there is in a newsletter that goes out to 29,000 people and a podcast that is listened to by hundreds of people each week. So just doing one of those little tiny things is amazing, and I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful week. Figure out what the hell you want to do with your life when you grow up and go do that thing. It feels so good to be on that path for a minute. It feels so good. And then you'll get off of it for a second, and then you'll have to get back on it. But the kind of feeling that you feel when you're marching towards a goal, it's one of the best drugs there is. Have a spectacular week.